I remember the exact moment when everything inside me shattered, the moment when I realized I had nowhere left to turn. The weight of bills stacked like small towers on the kitchen counter, each one whispering louder than the last about deadlines, debts, and the suffocating grip of not enough. I was tired, not just in my body but in my bones. Tired of trying harder, pushing more, and still standing on the edge of the same cliff, trembling with fear of the fall. The late nights spent staring at account statements that made no sense, the quiet frustration in my home when I tried to hide the truth from those I loved, the constant gnawing anxiety beneath every breath, it all led me to that breaking point. I was the hero in my story, but I was running out of strength. I had played the role of the provider, the fixer, the relentless worker who believed sheer willpower could pull us through. But here I was, drained and defeated, clutching onto hope by the fraying edges. And then something inside me stirred, that raw, aching part that speaks when words fall short. It was a need so deep and urgent that I couldn't ignore it. I had to ask for help, not in the way I'd done before, but in a way that felt honest, desperate, and new. I knelt beside my bed that night, a place where I'd whispered prayers for years, where hope had once felt alive and bright. But this time I couldn't bring myself to speak the usual words. The prayers felt hollow, an echo of hope that had been worn thin by disappointment. Instead, I breathed in all the fear, all the doubt, and let them rise up like a tide that couldn't be held back. I stopped asking for what I thought I needed, stopped repeating phrases I'd heard from others, and just opened my heart raw, naked and vulnerable. This wasn't a prayer rehearsed or polished. It wasn't about perfect words or fitting a script. It was a conversation from the edge of despair, a desperate plea that felt more like a surrender. I found myself asking something different, not just for a miracle in the abstract, but for the courage to see it when it came, for the clarity to recognize the path out of this darkness, for the humility to accept help in forms I hadn't expected. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I know what you might be feeling because I've been there, the anxiety that tightens your chest at the thought of money running out, the shame that wraps itself around your soul when you can't provide what you promised, and the weariness that settles when every effort seems to meet a wall. It feels like being trapped in quicksand, where every struggle sinks you deeper. And yet, even in that place of raw edges and fragile hope, there was an opening, a sliver of light that I never dared to look toward before. What if, just for a moment, you considered that the very way you've asked for help, or sought solutions, might be the thing standing between you and the breakthrough you need? What if the miracle you're desperate to see isn't about more hours or louder cries but about a shift so profound it changes everything? I'm not talking about empty promises or false hope. I'm talking about an inner transformation, the kind that starts quietly within, when the hero at your core stops fighting against the storm and begins to listen to what the storm is trying to teach. Your story might not look like mine. Your struggle could be different, and the miracle you seek might come wrapped in a form you haven't imagined yet. But I promise you this much, I understand what it feels like to be at the very edge, where the old ways don't work anymore, and you have to find a new kind of strength inside. That edge is terrifying, but it's where everything begins to change. That night I prayed differently. It wasn't just a turning point, it was the start of a journey I wasn't prepared for but desperately needed. It unlocked parts of me I didn't know existed and opened doors that had been sealed shut by fear and doubt. And though I'll never say it was easy, that shift brought me face to face with the kind of freedom that taps into deep trust, courage, and an unexpected kind of hope. If you're sitting where I was, on the verge of exhaustion, caught in frustration, longing for a miracle that seems unreachable, then maybe you're ready too. Not just to wish for change, but to step into a new way of asking, understanding, and trusting. Maybe the miracle isn't far from your grasp. Maybe it begins by something as simple, yet profound, as the way you choose to speak your truth when the world is listening. What miracle do you need today? What prayer does your heart hold that hasn't been spoken yet? This is where our story begins. There was a night not long after I shifted how I reached out for help, a night when the emptiness in my apartment felt almost unbearable. The silence carried the weight of every unanswered call, every unopened letter, and every distant hope that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I sat on the worn-out couch, my hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and anxiety. Suddenly, a thought emerged unbidden, What if the answer wasn't just about fixing my situation but about changing the way I related to it? That it wasn't about demanding relief, but about inviting a new conversation with whatever force or life energy I believed in. It felt strange, almost radical, to imagine this. Instead of being a desperate commander barking orders into the void, I envisioned myself as a friend, humble, curious, and patient, seeking guidance. In that quiet moment, I realized I had spent years wrestling with life's obstacles, pushing against resistance with brute force, when maybe it was time for a different dance. I began to see my hardship as less of an enemy and more as a teacher speaking in a language I was only beginning to understand. At the time, I found a worn journal and started scribbling down questions I never dared voice aloud. I asked myself what I needed beyond just money, what emotions, beliefs, or patterns might be tangled up underneath this surface struggle. Those pages became a lifeline, a place where I could release frustration without judgment. Through this practice, I discovered a hidden fear that had been whispering constantly, the dread of never being enough, of failing the people I loved most. Recognizing this shifted my focus away from scarcity towards something far more profound, a quest for inner bounty. One night, as rain tapped gently against my window, I spoke aloud, not a plea, but an invitation, show me how I can rise beyond this. The words carried a softness I'd never used before, less about demanding and more about opening a door. Surprisingly, instead of a sudden fix, what came next was a series of small awakenings. I began noticing tiny sparks of possibility in everyday moments, a stranger's smile, a chance conversation, an unexpected email. These glimpses fused to form a mosaic of hope and resilience, building quietly beneath the surface. I want to share about a time when I hesitated to trust this new way. My first instinct was skepticism. After years of struggle, what reason did I have to believe changing how I asked or prayed would shift reality? Yet, through persistence, I saw how the deep internal changes rippled outward. When I stopped trying to control outcomes and instead leaned into humility, doors I thought closed began to crack open. A friend reached out offering a job lead. A bill I feared was overdue got delayed without penalty. I was reminded that sometimes, the universe responds not to louder cries, but to softer, clearer signals born from genuine openness. Now, consider how this notion applies when you face a financial crossroads. If you are entrenched in fear or frustration, what might happen if you softened your approach, invited rather than demanded, questioned rather than pushed? It's like switching from a stone to water. Instead of crashing against obstacles, you find a way to flow around or beneath them. I realized that my battles weren't solely external but deeply internal, anchored in my beliefs about worthiness, abundance, and trust. My story took another turn when I started to recognize blessings hidden in plain sight. One morning, unusually early, I caught sight of a single daffodil blooming in the crack of a sidewalk, a tiny burst of life thriving where it shouldn't have. That flower became a symbol, a whisper that growth happens even in unlikely places and that I could grow too if I stayed patient and attentive. The financial strain was still real, but my perspective had shifted. I stopped measuring progress by numbers on a bank statement and started measuring it by the strength I felt within to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. Around this time, I experimented with a simple exercise each evening. I would reflect on 3 moments from the day where I glimpsed goodwill or unexpected opportunity, no matter how small. Sometimes it was a kind word from a coworker, sometimes, the fact that I had food on my table when hunger was a real threat. This practice rewired my focus, gently pulling me away from despair's gravitational pull toward gratitude's expansive embrace. I remember a friend, an old colleague, once said, "The greatest changes happen when we begin softening our edges." At first, I didn't understand. I thought being strong meant pushing unrelentingly. But as I wrestled with financial pressure, I found that true strength sometimes looks like surrendering old patterns, replacing harsh self-judgment with self-compassion, replacing force with flow, replacing isolation with openness. It's the strength of the river eroding rock not through power but persistence combined with gentle grace. That night of scaled-back demands and invitations to life was not a spell or magic trick, but an opening. And I believe that opening is available for you as well, not because life suddenly became free from struggle, but because your inner approach can change the nature of the struggle itself. I won't pretend the journey was without setbacks. In fact, many days felt like one step forward and two back. But each time I returned to that quiet place inside, where my heart spoke without fear, I found more resilience waiting. In the quiet moments when the world seems cold and unforgiving, remember that your voice, softened and honest, holds power. When you shift your stance from wrestling to welcoming, you invite unseen forces to join you in your journey. I'm speaking from the trenches, where transformation isn't born from a single grand event but from countless subtle awakenings that, over time, reshape everything. So, when you ask yourself what shift needs to happen now, what new way of reaching out might release you from this place, listen closely for that whisper within. It often arrives not as thunder but as the gentlest breeze nudging you toward a new horizon. In those moments of deep uncertainty, I found myself wandering into an unexpected place, one where surrender wasn't a sign of weakness but a gateway to profound transformation. I had always viewed giving up as defeat, but this experience rewired my understanding in a way I couldn't have anticipated. Instead of struggling against the tide, I began exploring how to drift with it, allowing the currents of life to carry me rather than exhausting myself trying to swim upstream. It wasn't immediate, nor was it easy. It felt more like an internal unraveling before weaving a new fabric of resilience. One evening, overwhelmed by nowhere left to go feelings, I opened a book on mindfulness and stumbled upon a practice called not knowing. The author described it as a willingness to live without answers for a while, to inhabit uncertainty without pushing to fix it immediately. Skeptical, I decided to try this unknown vulnerability. I sat quietly, breathing into the edges of discomfort instead of recoiling from them. Surprisingly, within this openness, a subtle shift began, the sharp edges of my anxiety dulled, and instead of demanding answers, I welcomed questions. It was as though my heart recalibrated itself to a softer frequency, receptive rather than rigid. This experience reminded me of a time as a child when I watched a spider build its web, not with force but with deliberate care, thread by thread, creating something intricate and strong from fragility. I reflected on how my own efforts felt frantic compared to that steady craft. What if my own progress required patience and precision, not haste and power? This analogy gave me permission to slow down and rebuild with intention, appreciating the quiet work that wasn't immediately visible but essential. On a particularly bleak afternoon, I remember sitting by my apartment window watching leaves spiral downward. They didn't resist the wind, they embraced it. Their descent wasn't failure but a graceful transition necessary for new life. That image anchored me. It spoke of cycles and trust, how endings invite beginnings, often cloaked in uncertainty. Inspired, I started journaling about transitions, acknowledging grief for losses while planting seeds for new possibilities. These writings became a private compass guiding me through emotional terrain, blending sorrow with hope in a way I hadn't allowed before. In the following weeks, I encountered resistance, not externally, but within myself. Old fears clanged like chains whenever I tried to lean into this new openness. At times, I felt like a tightrope walker balancing between doubt and faith without a safety net. On one particularly challenging morning, I shared my feelings with a close friend, confessing my fears of failing those who depend on me. Their response surprised me: "You are stronger not because you control everything but because you admit your limits and still move forward." This insight planted a seed of new courage. It dawned on me that admitting vulnerability isn't defeat, it's a bridge to authenticity. Curiously, this shift in how I viewed my challenges began to reflect in my everyday interactions. I noticed moments when I hesitated less to ask for assistance, whether from family or community. Earlier, pride had barricaded me in solitude. Now, each small connection wove a safety net under my feet. I realized strength wasn't a solitary fortress but a tapestry of interdependence knit with threads of trust and openness. This revelation redefined my relationship with support, not as a sign of weakness but as a recognition of shared human experience. Moreover, I experimented with pausing before reacting to financial stress. Instead of immediately succumbing to frustration or panic, I'd breathe, allowing space between stimulus and response. Gradually, this practice fostered clearer thinking, helping me identify practical steps, like negotiating payment plans or seeking financial advice, that were previously overshadowed by overwhelm. It was a delicate dance, transforming raw emotion into constructive action. Every mindful pause became an act of reclaiming agency amid chaos. One morning, I decided to take a walk through a nearby park, letting the natural world remind me of life's rhythms beyond my circumstances. Among towering oaks and whispering pines, I witnessed a family of ants diligently building a protective mound. Their persistence, unity, and purposeful labor sparked a quiet inspiration. Life, I realized, builds strength not in singular bursts of effort but through constant, steady commitment. This imagery nurtured patience within me, reminding me that progress often hides beneath the surface before blossoming outward. As new perspectives took root, I began to appreciate the paradox of control and its limits. Life's unpredictability, once a source of dread, became a field where creativity and adaptation could flourish. Recognizing that not everything was up to me allowed me to stop battling invisible storms and instead learn to navigate by adjusting my sails. This mindset was not mere resignation but an empowered acceptance, choosing how to respond rather than being swept away. With this understanding, I revisited how I engaged with abundance itself. Instead of a fixed destination defined by numbers, abundance transformed into an unfolding experience of gratitude, generosity, and openness to receive. I found unexpected joy in sharing small gifts, a meal, a kind word, not despite scarcity but because of its presence. This redefinition rewired my relationship with wealth, loosening the grip of fear and inviting flow through my life in surprising ways. By embracing uncertainty, vulnerability, and steady persistence, I forged a new kind of power from within. Each layered insight peeled back old assumptions, revealing that the journey toward renewed stability is not a straight line but an evolving mosaic of courage, grace, and transformative patience. In this unfolding, I found that the way we receive and engage with challenges can create ripples far beyond immediate circumstances, shaping an inner landscape fertile for lasting change. I felt completely unmoored one afternoon as I sat on the edge of my bed, the sunlight fading through the dusty window panes. The weight pressing down on me wasn't just financial, it was the crushing sense that I'd been asking for help all wrong, as if my words collided with an invisible barrier. In that silence, a sudden insight emerged, not about asking more loudly or harder, but about embracing a new kind of conversation, one rooted in authenticity and release. Instead of trying to bend reality with forceful demands, I realized it was time to cultivate patience, humility, and openness. A memory surfaced of a time I watched a potter at work, shaping clay with deliberate softness. Each rotation of the wheel was gentle but purposeful, coaxing the shapeless into something extraordinary. It struck me how much I'd tried to mold my life with rigidity, expecting results through sheer will, when transformation often requires yielding with steady care. This image lingered, inviting me to approach my own struggles as an artisan approaches raw material, with softness that doesn't mean weakness but intention. One evening, I began to whisper words that felt unfamiliar, as if I was rediscovering a forgotten language. Instead of beseeching for relief, I started expressing raw gratitude for even the smallest fragments of hope, a warm cup of coffee, a friend's unexpected message, a breath of fresh air. These moments slowly rewired my heart, creating a foundation of abundance that wasn't tied solely to material gain but to a deeper sense of connection. I recognized that abundance sprouts not from lack but from recognizing the gifts already present. At the same time, I wrestled with pride and the urge to shoulder the burden alone. Early on, the thought of admitting vulnerability terrified me. It felt like exposing a crack in my armor that could shatter everything. But then, a quiet voice inside whispered that strength could be found in truth-telling and seeking support, not only from others but within myself. Slowly, I began opening up to trusted confidants, acknowledging my fears with honesty. Instead of isolation breeding despair, these conversations fostered renewed resolve and unexpected encouragement. In one vivid moment, as rain pattered softly against the window, an idea blossomed within me, to compose letters, not to be sent, but to be poured from my heart onto paper. Each word became a release valve, unburdening my mind from swirling worries. Through these letters, I poured out every frustration, every hope, every question, crafting an ongoing dialogue with myself that nurtured clarity and calm. Over time, those letters transformed into a journal of evolution, capturing the cracks and celebrations of my journey with intimate detail. I remember a morning walk to the corner bakery, the winter air sharp and invigorating. A street musician played a gentle melody, his warm guitar echoing resilience through the chill. Watching people drop small coins into his open case, I marveled at the exchange, how generosity, even in scarce moments, creates a ripple far beyond what can be measured. That scene illuminated for me how generosity isn't reserved only for those with overflowing resources but can be practiced daily through kindness, patience, and sharing presence. Soon afterward, I began practicing brief pauses before reacting to stress, especially around financial concerns. Instead of immediate tension or fear, I would take a breath, feeling the air fill my lungs and then slowly exhale. In those pauses, a doorway opened. I found room to consider solutions previously obscured by frantic energy, a phone call to a creditor, reworking a budget, or tapping into community resources. These small acts reclaimed my agency, proving that calm intentionality reshapes pressure into possibility. I never expected the profound impact that setting intentional, simple daily intentions would have. Each morning, I would declare my commitment to face whatever the day presented with courage and openness. Writing these intentions felt like planting seeds in my soul, seeds that, though invisible at first, grew roots carrying me forward through turbulent moments. The process grounded me and shifted my focus from what was out of reach to what was within grasp. Alongside all this, I discovered the power of stories, especially stories of those who had tread difficult paths before me. Reading biographies of individuals who overcame overwhelming odds to rebuild their lives provided me with a well of inspiration and practical wisdom. Their journeys reminded me that setbacks don't define the totality of a life, and resilience often hides in persistence through invisible trials. These narratives became an unwritten map guiding my steps. Gradually, I stopped associating success exclusively with immediate financial stability. Instead, I began placing value on the growth of my character, the expansion of my empathy, and the quiet moments of self-compassion. It became clear that the way I experienced abundance was as important as what I physically possessed. With this heartsight, I began crafting a new vision for my future, one not anchored solely in numbers but in deeper wholeness and purpose. In these unfolding layers of transformation, I encountered setbacks that threatened to unravel all progress. Yet, each encounter honed my resolve, each stumble became a lesson rather than a defeat. I learned to celebrate small victories, like answering a phone call that made me uncomfortable, saying no to impulsive spending, or reaching out for help instead of retreating. These acts, seemingly minor, knitted a new internal narrative of empowerment. Now, imagine applying this mindset to the crossroads in your financial journey. How might your challenges shift if approached with gradual intention, self-inquiry, and openness to new perspectives? The strength isn't in the speed of the breakthrough but in the quality of the steps you consistently take. In embracing the ebb and flow of effort and rest, clarity and doubt, you build a foundation for transformation that stands deeper than circumstances. Each day offers a choice, to persist with old patterns or to pioneer a path of renewed trust in your resilience and capacity. What whispers beneath your surface, waiting for your attention? The conversation is just beginning. Reflecting on this journey so far, I recognize how the fabric of my experience has been woven from threads both delicate and unyielding, entwined in ways that surprisingly reinforce, rather than unravel, each other. It's as if I'd been navigating a vast forest under shifting light, the terrain uneven and obscured, yet offering glimpses of meaning through dappled shadows and flickers of insight. In moments when the path seemed lost, subtle shifts in perception emerged, gently unveiling directions I hadn't noticed before. These subtle awakenings have accumulated quietly, creating a tapestry of transformation that feels less like a destination and more like the evolving horizon of who I am becoming. I remember walking through that dense grove, where every step stirred fallen leaves, sending up spirals of scent and color. The forest was both shelter and challenge, sometimes thick with uncertainty, at other times mysteriously inviting with soft bird calls and shafts of golden sunlight piercing the canopy. Much like navigating life's complexities, it asked for both attentiveness and surrender, learning when to press forward and when to breathe deeply and allow events to unfold. It struck me how the discomfort of the unknown could coexist with a profound sense of potential, a pulse beating beneath the turbulence that whispered I was not alone in this journey. As I moved through these shifting shadows, my own inner dialogue transformed. The harsh self-judgments softened into curious questions, inviting me to explore rather than condemn the parts of myself entangled in fear or frustration. It was as if I was trading a chain for a compass, not abandoning the urgency I carried, but choosing a more nuanced way to navigate it. This change wasn't a sudden epiphany but a gradual awakening, one cultivated by attentiveness to subtle emotional currents, much like a sailor who learns to read shifting winds and adjust the sails with deftness and care. It felt as though I had stumbled upon an ancient rhythm humming beneath the noise, a cadence that harmonizes struggle with grace, resistance with letting go, and doubt with trust. Such a rhythm doesn't erase hardship, instead, it invites a dance with impermanence, where each step forward, no matter how small or faltering, contributes to an unfolding story of resilience. This interplay between movement and stillness, between assertion and yielding, has opened a space within me where possibility thrives in unexpected ways. There were moments when the weight of uncertainty threatened to eclipse all progress. I found myself confronting internal tensions, a tug-of-war between longing for immediate change and the patience required for real transformation. Intriguingly, it was within this tension that strength began to emerge, shaped not by certainty, but by my willingness to remain present with ambiguity. This expansion of capacity allowed me to listen more deeply, not only to my own needs but to the environment around me, which responded in kind with subtle signs and gentle openings. In embracing this dynamic process, I discovered that transformation often masquerades in quiet persistence rather than grand gestures. It is in the accumulation of small, intentional acts, the soft resilience of a tree bending in the wind, the steady drip of water carving stone, that lasting change takes root. Recognizing this, I grew more patient with my own timeline, understanding that progress isn't always linear or measurable in conventional terms. Instead, it is often encoded in shifts of awareness, in expanded self-compassion, and in the loosening of old patterns that constrain the heart. At times, unexpected warmth broke through the dense canopy of doubt, moments where connection, kindness, or renewed self-belief bypassed the clutter of fear. These were like hidden clearings, places where the sun's rays filter in unfiltered and warmth gathers in gentle pools. In these spaces, I learned that vulnerability harbors profound strength, and that allowing myself to be seen, both by others and by my inner self, sets the stage for growth that reaches beyond circumstance. Looking inward during this ebb and flow, I sensed an emerging coherence, a gathering of scattered pieces into a mosaic imbued with new depth. The unknown no longer felt solely like a barrier, but rather a creative canvas, inviting exploration with curiosity and courage. Each encounter with uncertainty became less a threat and more a portal opening wider, presenting opportunities to embody resilience not through control but through greater alignment with my evolving truth. This gradual harmonization of experience, emotion, and insight carries an undercurrent of hope, one that doesn't promise a simple cure, but a profound reorientation toward how I engage with life's challenges. It is as though I'm learning a new language of belonging within myself, discovering ways to hold tension and tenderness simultaneously. The compass I carry now points toward a way of being where complexity is embraced, and every step, whether short or trembling, contributes to the unfolding narrative of growth. As you hold these reflections with me, I invite you to lean into the questions they stir and honor the stirrings within your own heart. There lies a fertile stillness awaiting your arrival, where transformation stirs beneath the surface and new paths beckon. The journey is ongoing, unfolding with infinite possibility just beyond the edges of certainty, inviting us to move forward with both grace and grit, hand in hand with the mystery that invites our courage to awaken. There was a time I believed my worth hinged entirely on the numbers jutting from my bank statements, the digits that fluctuated like cruel tides pulling me under. Yet, it wasn't simply the dollars and cents that wore me down but the invisible knots tightening inside me with every setback, every unanswered prayer, every sleepless night filled with doubt. In those hours alone, staring into shadows that crept along my walls, I realized that true rescue wouldn't come from external fixes alone. It had to emerge from within, a transformation so intimate, it rewired the very way I related to struggle and possibility. I found myself walking down a quiet street one early morning, the sun casting long golden fingers over the pavement, and something within stirred, a subtle invitation to trust a different rhythm. Life seemed to whisper that resilience isn't born from sheer force, but from a willingness to hold the full mess of human experience without flinching. That day, the air tasted crisp but charged, like the moment before a storm, and I felt a tremor of understanding. The miracles we seek are often disguised in the language of patience, vulnerability, and sincere surrender. Holding that truth felt like stepping onto uncharted ground. I knew the terrain wouldn't be smooth, there would be twists of uncertainty and unexpected bends that tested more than my faith. But I also sensed something sacred unfolding, a rebirth of spirit not contingent on immediate outcomes but anchored in a deeper, steadier foundation. I began to see my challenges not as punishments or failures but as invitations to stretch into new dimensions of courage, creativity, and self-compassion. The hard edges of my narrative softened, revealing texture and depth that had been hidden by sheer survival instincts. One evening, the sky heavy with dusk, I whispered aloud a prayer without demands or expectations. "Show me the path through," I said, "even when all I feel is fog and silence." That simple act changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't about commanding a miracle as if it were a transaction, but about becoming receptive to guidance that might arrive through unexpected channels, small gestures of kindness, the insight sparked by a late-night conversation, or the quiet strength discovered in untold patience. The miracle transformed from a distant prize into a living process unfolding step by tender step. I remember vividly the sensation of thawing inside, how the grinding tightness of anxiety eased into a restless calm that made space for reflection and hope. The shift didn't erase struggle, challenges continued knocking at my door. Yet, with each obstacle, I grew stronger not because life fell into neat order but because I learned to embrace the dance between chaos and grace. Over time, I cultivated an inner sanctuary fortified by acceptance, resilience, and an unwavering belief that barrenness gives way to blooms, even when visible signs are scarce. What struck me most is how the miracle I longed for revealed itself in connection. It wasn't an abstract force somewhere out there but a current flowing through shared vulnerability, human kindness, and the courage to show up authentically, without masks. I encountered this truth in quiet conversations with friends, the encouragement in a stranger's smile, and the ongoing dialogue I held within, a conversation rooted in honesty, self-forgiveness, and hope that refused to be extinguished. This web of relation became a home, steady and warm, amid uncertainty's chill. I know the temptation to retreat into despair, to bargain with fate, or to silence the yearning heart because the path forward seems tangled and long. But what I've come to believe, deeply and fiercely, is that while our outer circumstances may shift slowly, the landscape of our soul can expand swiftly when we allow honest presence to lead the way. There's a power in meeting fear with gentleness, in acknowledging brokenness without shame, and in forging forward fueled not solely by ambition but by the quiet strength of persistence wrapped in humility. So here we stand, at a crossroads not only between scarcity and abundance, but between old storylines and new possibilities. I invite you to lean toward the hunger inside yourself, not with harsh judgment or frantic grasping, but with a tender curiosity that seeks how your greatest trials might be pathways in disguise. Lean into the longing, the courage that flickers even on your darkest days, and the resilient spark that refuses to be snuffed out. There is no perfect formula or instant escape, but there is a profound invitation to awaken to the truth that you are more than your circumstances, more than your fears, and more than the sums that add up or fall short. If I could speak across time to that old version of myself, fearful, exhausted, yet stubbornly hopeful, I would say, keep speaking in your own voice, unfiltered and true, because somewhere beyond that honest prayer lies a current strong enough to carry you toward transformation. More than miracles cast from afar, it is the miracle of your own evolving spirit that matters most. Trust that your willingness to open in new ways creates ripples, touching unseen shores and sparking renewal. And as you carry forward, remember this: the hero within you has never been defined by limits but by the courage to seek light even when all appears lost.